Hey, this is Tiqqle, and in this video we're going to go over the hot fixes that came out specifically for PvP across all the different classes. There was a lot of changes and they were announced in probably 2 to 3 different announcements. People thought that they were mainly focused on PvE, then later there was more PvP changes. So we're going to walk through those very quickly so that you know if your class was impacted, and then, you know, we can see what happened. I've already done some arena games since these changes, so I'll make mention of what I've experienced during that time. I've also did a plus 14 key last week, so I was able to experience some of the reasons why some of these classes are probably getting adjusted. Now, in terms of Death Knight Unholy, with regional restarts, which was today, if you're watching this video on the 15th of December, Mastery Dreadblade's effectiveness reduced by 20%. I ran with a DK in PvE in a Mythic Plus. They were just shattering Mythic Plus. It was crazy. Just the highest damage I've ever seen. And you think like maybe a Marksman. We actually had a Marksman there. We'll talk about that later. But anyway, in PvE, I saw them smashing it. And I've heard that they're just dominating in every area for PvE. So this was most likely a shift for PvE, reducing the effectiveness of their mastery by 20%. This is going to impact them in PvP as well, but it's just good to know. We'll have to see. I haven't experienced Unholy DK in PvP yet since this change, but I've only ran into tons of Frost DKs. Next, Druid with regional reset, balance of all things legendary. Now it causes Eclipse to increase your critical strike chance with Arcane or Nature by 40%, decreasing by 8% every 1 second, was 50. This is really interesting. I didn't even know this legendary existed, and it kind of makes sense, and it actually makes me very scared because Eclipse increasing your critical chance by Nature or Arcane, Nature or Arcane by 40%. That's crazy. You're gonna get popped by a Boomkin. That's just wild. But it's only a small 10% nerf, so that doesn't seem that big. Starfall damage being reduced by 6%, clearly a PvE change. Starfall is doing a ton of damage, which is kind of cool to see again, but at the same time, it's a little spooky. I mean, just the amount of AoE pressure that you can get out of Starfall and just damage in general is just scary. If you go into Warcraft logs, you can see how influential that ability is now, which is kind of cool to see, though, because in BFA, it didn't really feel that great. In PvP, even, I've seen Boomkins doing damage with Starfall, which is kind of spooky. Now, Marksman Hunter was far and away one of the top DPS in PvE. They have been adjusted, but also keep in mind they're also huge in PvP. With regional restarts, damage of Arcane Shot reduced by 5%. Arcane Shot reduced by 5%. Now, this might not seem like a lot, but it's kind of an interesting shift because of how far and away they were kind of leading the pack. And when I level my characters between 50 and 60, I only see sub-rogues, marksman hunters, I mean the bottom classes, and you know, this is kind of falling in that bucket. We'll have to see how this works out. I haven't raided with my guild yet. We'll see how it kind of feels. But I'll tell you, in Mythic Plus with the 14, they're stomping. They're doing a lot of damage. Now, Mage, Arcane Harmony, now up to 10 stacks in PvP, was 15. I think this is the Arcane ability increasing the Arcane Barrage, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong down below. Phalanx Stop, the Knife ability, there's just a correction here having to do with that. Mistweaver resolved an issue where the Jade Serpent isn't healing correctly. That's good. Now, this is the big one. Rogues, Reverberation, Curing Conduit effectiveness reduced by 50% when engaged in PvP, was 30%. So it's 20. Okay, so I know people have been finagling how to describe this, but it's 20% more reduction. But it was 30, went to 50, so they almost doubled the nerf on it in PvP. Echoing Reprimand, initial damage reduced by 50% when engaged in combat. So I'll tell you, when I was in PvP, I was playing some arena earlier. Rogue opened up on me, used that ability. It crit me for 3.6k, which is sad for sub-rogues, sad for a lot of rogues, but for me, as the shaman, it wasn't an 8K-er, so that made me feel pretty good, or 10K, so that made me feel kind of nice. Now, let's keep on going. So this is kind of rough. This is really about, I feel like PvP, clearly, I mean, obviously, the way this is described, but it was scary. I mean, sub-rogues were just kind of crazy. Increases damage dealt while stealth active by 25. Okay, so that was actually nerfed. Cold Blood, now properly reduced by effects such as Verse. So apparently that wasn't scaling right when you hit somebody with Cold Blood. It wasn't scaling off of their Verse correctly. So that's another nerf, but really a correction. Night Stalker, again, Increases damage dealt by what? Stealth or Shadow Dance is active by 8%, down from 12. Okay, so that's you know, a 33% down of the buff was reduced, is in 4% total, right? So Shadow Blades now deals an additional 30% damage, was 40. So that is, yep, I know that is going from 40% to 30%. That's a pretty big decrease, 20% decrease of what that buff was. Overall buffing you for 30% now. Now, that's that for Rogue. They got a real big pullback. We'll have to see how that plays out in PvP. In PvE, I don't actually think they were crazy in PvE. So I think this definitely is focused on just PvP, enemy players, you know, and so on and so forth. It's really all focused on PvP. But I almost feel like they, in PvE, like, I haven't seen them do that amazing yet in raid, or at least the raids I've been in. Now, Ellie gets an adjustment. We all love to hear this clapping in the chat because Echoes of the Great Sundering legendary effect increased by 25%. Sorry, 25 seconds, up from 15. What is this one? This is when you Earthshock, it makes it so that you have a buff. That buff increases the next Earthquake by 175%. So then what you have to do is, after you spend that Maelstrom, you have to build it back up and then spend an Earthquake. That process is a little weird. We have a video down below in case you're curious if you're struggling with that legendary. But that whole process didn't change. You still have to spend 60 Maelstrom, then generate 60, and then spend it again on that buffed Earthquake. But what it does allow is for additional time for that buff to be up. You don't have 15 seconds to generate it. You have 25. This is helpful because if the pack of mobs dies in Mythic Plus before you can drop the Earthquake, you can hold on to it for another 10 seconds before you dump it out maybe on the next pack. So that's actually kind of nice, and I appreciate this quality of life adjustment from Blizzard. Now, for Kyrian changes, now there's a ton of changes. We're not going to go over all these. We're just going to go down because this is really the things that were just announced on the that came in the 14th, announced, and then they were actually hit the servers on the 15th. Let's go ahead. There is something big though that I haven't heard a lot of people talking about. This, not this. This one. Due to the relatively increased pace of PvP in Shadowlands, which Blizzard is acknowledging, that's a big deal. That seems like that was intentional, okay? Dampening no longer begins at 20% in 2v2 arena. Dampening is applied immediately in 2s and 3 after, dampening is applied immediately in 2v2 and after 5 minutes in 3v3. That is extremely interesting. Because what originally happened was when you went into a 2v2 arena, the dampening was already set at 20%. Healing was already reduced by 20%. Now, when you go into the arena, it starts at 0. It does mean that it's going to start being applied, but you don't have the 20% healing reduction immediately. What does this mean? This means that double DPS teams are going to have a hell of a hard time to versus what it was to get kills against teams with healers. This is a little sad to me because I think that some people were running double DPS comps and they were succeeding. And people even with more unconventional comps were able to get some rating and maybe have some more fun. It, of course, wasn't that much fun for classes that ran with healers, and the healers were like, what the heck, dude? The damage is crazy. I can't keep up. Dampening is already in effect. Which is fair. I see both sides of the coin, but for me, I feel bad because I know there's people, you guys comment below what you think about this change specifically, because I know this one is going to affect some of my buddies that are double DPS fiends, right? So, it's kind of interesting that they reduced that dampening effect down to starting, not just at 20 immediately. Kind of an interesting change. This does also kind of a little bit help the more hybrid classes like Enhanced, for example, or Ret, which is not needing any help right now, but classes that have healing throughput that's going to be 100% more potent, which is good. It's good for them. And the last thing I just want to mention quickly on the 14th when they announced changes was that they basically nerfed Torghast. I'll have a separate video about this, but they nerfed Torghast so that basically healers and tanks are going to have a little bit more challenging of a time. I made a separate video about best way to do it as a shaman, and of course the healer was the best way. Well, guess what? They adjusted things. Unfortunate. But they did change anima powers in a big way. And I'll just show you an example. Instead of having it be that like Deadened Earth reduces the cooldown of Earth Ally by, it used to be 20%, now it's 40%. They doubled the effectiveness and reduced the number of times it can stack. I'm really glad they're making these changes because in Torghast, honestly, when you're doing your weekly runs for Soul Ash, you have 6 floors to go through. There's not really that many buffs. And sometimes you can get not enough momentum. So this will help you get momentum with your builds quickly. It'll also make it more impactful when you make a decision, 40 versus 20, and having the stacks being less is good. When we get to be able to do kind of the higher, more floors, the twisting quarters, which is not what's required for Soul Ash, that's just cosmetic stuff, this will be even more impactful. So I'm excited about that. And then there was this other post that came out a few more days ago. I think it was on Friday or Saturday. These were other changes. This was this adjustment was Unholy DK getting just reduced by 15. I think this eventually became 20%, but this is an additional tanks threat being increased by 10%. There was blood being increased damage of pretty much most of its abilities. Demon Hunters getting an overall 5% buff. These are all changes since the raid had come out, and a lot of these seem to be PvE shifts. Assassination, all damage increased by 5%. We had Restoration Shaman being nerfed by 4% for all healing, specifically healing rain getting an additional 10% nerf. Those are pretty big chunks, but we'll have to see how this works out. Destruction Warlock getting a 22% buff to Chaos Bolt. Arms Warrior getting an adjustment of Mortal Strike, getting more damage in PvE while getting that reduced in PvP to even things out, but it's a buff to PvE. Slam being buffed by 25%. I mean, it's getting doubled, by 50%, was 25. And then Fury, all damage, all damage abilities increased by 5. That's a lot. So these things, on top of the changes we just talked about for Torghast, on top of the changes we just talked about for the other changes to sub and other things, these are the PvP changes that have happened going into the second week of raiding. The mythic, Race for World First is beginning. Now, that's it. Those are all the changes. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. My personal take is this. I think Marksman Hunter is still going to be... I'm thinking that they're one of the classes that if they lose their damage, they're really going to be out of the PvP meta, like, pretty quick. But I think they're going to be okay with just those 5% changes. They haven't nerfed the curing ability yet, so I think they'll probably be okay. Sub Rogue's got a pretty savage bunch of changes. Now, to be honest with you, I don't know. I've gone against only 1 or 2 in PvP, but they still seem to have the same amount of stuns, same amount of utility that they do have. So I'm struggling to think that they're going to be totally gutted. They were definitely, I think, off the deep end, and that's okay. I think there's some other off the deep end classes right now in terms of the PvP meta, like potentially Windwalker, Red Paladin, potentially Arms Warrior, right? Those are all really strong classes right now without a whole ton of drawbacks because of a lot of the new toolkit they got for Shadowlands. But I do think that the classes that were mainly changed, Unholy, Marks, Sub, I think they're going to survive. I think it's going to be okay. I personally think that that the healing for our Shaman also okay. I think these are all slight adjustments of the outliers, and I do indeed hope that these outliers are squashed a little bit because we need to have class diversity in PvE and in PvP. It is not fun to always go against a Sub Rogue in PvP. It is not fun to only go against Marksman Hunter, Warrior. That's not fun. It's fun when you have a variety of compositions in PvP to go against. In 2s, 3s, BGs, etc. And in PvE, you can't just have the outliers. You don't want people re-rolling to Phantoms. Of course, it's incredibly challenging to balance things, but I do hope these things bring stuff in line a bit more. I like the fast speed of PvP, but there is still a lot of outliers, and I'm a little bit worried about Enhance and Ellie when they're not really seen ever. Caster's particularly hard to spot other than Shadow Priest. So it's tough. But with that being said, let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you guys do like this content, if you like the coverage of Shadowlands stuff, specifically Shamans and other things, let me know down below in the comments or by pressing that sub button and that like button. I know about 70% of you haven't yet, and if you do sub, really appreciate it. We'll see you on stream every day, twitch.tv/TiqqleThis, 9 p.m. Have a good one, everybody. Take care.